Welcome back to RŌL Radio. On this episode, we are lucky enough to have with us a true legend in the sport of judo, Jimmy Pedro. Jimmy is a World Judo Champion, two-time Olympic bronze medalist, coach of Olympic silver medalist Travis Stevens, and two-time Olympic gold medalist Kayla Harrison. On this episode, Jimmy shares his journey of growing up in his father's dojo all the way to the Olympic Games as both a player and coach. Jimmy also shares his philosophy on coaching students at all levels, from recreational players to Olympic athletes, and what it takes to become the best in the world. Jimmy also speaks candidly about where he sees the future of judo heading and what is needed to change that direction. Here is RŌL Radio with the insightful and resolved Jimmy Pedro.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we are live. Gary, how are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm super excited about today. We've got a very, very special guest, probably the most accomplished person we've had on so far, and I can't wait to get into it.
This is going to be very, very interesting conversation. Jimmy Pedro, welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for taking your time out of your super busy day and having this conversation with us. How are things going for you today? I hear you're super busy these days.
Fantastic. I'm one of the fortunate ones. Nobody's going to feel bad for us. Our company is doing amazing. The demand is incredible right now. Probably a combination of, people wanting to train at home and setting up mats in their garage, and people renovating their schools because they're getting excited about reopening. Maybe they got some loan money from the government, for cheap interest rates, what have you. But our company's super busy, and I'm very, very thankful of the support of the whole industry.
So for listeners who don't know who you are, why don't you just give us a quick description of, because the broad spectrum of things that you've done, are doing, and will be doing in the future is quite impressive and quite ridiculous in my opinion. Give us a quick rundown. Where all this started, what you do, who you are, what's going on in your life?
I'll try to be as brief as possible. So as an athlete, I was a 4-time Olympian. I won 2 Olympic medals in the sport of judo, and I was a World Judo Champion. As a coach, I was one of the most successful coaches in American history. I helped produce America's first Olympic gold medalist, who went on and repeated as gold medal, as a 2-time gold Olympic champion. And we also had 4 Olympic medals of the 2 games that I coached. So we were the most successful Olympic teams in history, and that was 2012 and 2016. In my professional life, I helped found and started Fuji Mat Company about 6 years ago, and we have quickly become the household brand for BJJ grappling world. Our mats are the highest quality, and we've done a phenomenal job in supporting the industry and in building some of the most amazing academies in the world at fujimats.com. So I'm the president of that. And I'm also the vice president of Fuji Sports, the gi and gear company. So we have, again, done an incredible job of supporting the industry and helping some of the huge associations of the world grow and expand, worldwide with our infrastructure and our team behind them, designing the gis, rash guards, shorts, etc. So that, and then on top of that, I have one of the United States Judo National Training Centers at my academy at Pedro's Judo Center in Wakefield, Massachusetts. So
no joke, yeah, there's a lot going on there, isn't there?
Plus 4 kids and a wife. And
You're a busy man. And by the way, you guys done an amazing job with Fuji mats. We have them at my academy, and I love the product. But the more importantly, I'm really curious how all this started. Can you take us to the beginning, of this judo journey? Because obviously you would not be doing what you're doing today if it wasn't for you stepping on the mat for very, very, very first time.
So it all started with my father. My dad was an undersized kid in school, and he loved sports, and he tried to play sports, but he had polio when he was a kid, and actually went to a polio camp. He recovered from it, but he had really small legs as a result. And so since he was undersized, he didn't get a chance to play, the regular sports like football and baseball. Even though he tried out and he went to every practice, he never got to dress for the games. and he was very frustrated as an athlete. And one day he was just driving down the road and he saw a sign that said Judo Karate Center. And he stopped in and talked to the instructor and said, well, show me these sports. What are they all about? And he fell in love with the sport of judo because it was a sport where, the harder you trained, the better you got. The more time you invested in yourself, the more progress you made. And it was something that he could control his own destiny. And because he was undersized and he grew up in an inner city, he got in a lot of, altercations when he was a kid. So why not learn how to protect yourself and be a better fighter? So he just fell in love with the sport of judo. He progressed quickly through the ranks. He started when he was 19. He ended up, becoming ranked in the United States. And at the time, judo was far more competitive than it is today. The fields were much deeper. Judo was a much more popular sport in this country than it is now. But he ended up competing in the Olympic trials. He started his own club when I was 2 years old. And that's how I got the introduction to the sport. I was going to the dojo since I was a toddler in diapers, running around the mats, watching kids train, watching my dad train athletes, go to competitions. And then when I was 5 years old, my dad said, okay, now you're going to start doing judo 3 days a week. You're going to be, starting practice. And for me, it wasn't an option. It wasn't like I said, had a choice to say, Dad, I don't really like this. My dad was like a military sergeant. He should have been a drill sergeant. He belonged in the military, but he couldn't go because he had polio. So he didn't qualify. But he ran our school like it was a military academy. And we had some of the toughest kids in the country come through my academy. My dad didn't do it for money. He did it to produce champions. That was his number one goal. And I did it. My sister did it. It was a family affair. My mother became a black belt. My dad was obviously a black belt, one of the greatest coaches in American history, my father. He helped produce not just myself, but Ronda Rousey, Kayla Harrison. He was part of all of these past champions. And even when I was a little boy, we had, one of the most competitive clubs in the nation. That's how I got my start.
Do you feel that there was you mentioned that you didn't have a choice as far as judo. There was no option. It was kind of a big umbrella of the family event, if you will. I mean, it was just the activity that you guys were doing.
Right.
Did you feel at any point of time throughout your childhood that you didn't want to do it and you were just forced into it?
Always as a young kid. I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved going to the dojo. Because there were always lots of kids around, right? So Saturday morning, we'd show up early for practice. There'd be 40 kids. We'd just be playing tackle, football, and, we always had wiffle ball games, or we were always playing before judo and having a blast with friends. And then judo time came. And because my dad was a hard coach and he trained us like animals, practices weren't fun. I mean, we were doing plyometric, jump ups and step ups and medicine ball throws and all kinds of functional strength training. When I was 5 years old, we were doing that stuff. Now you're talking about late 1970s, early 1980s. We were doing all that sort of Russian style training then. So my dad was well beyond his years in terms of like being advanced as a trainer. But practices were super hard. And, my dad walked around with the old school with a bamboo stick. And if kids goofed off, they got whacked in the butt. And it was militaristic, but we produced tough kids. We produced champions. And, you didn't talk during training. You shut your mouth and you just worked hard. Yeah. That's the way I was brought up.
Thomas, can I get a bamboo stick for kids?
Well, funny story was when I opened my dojo, we're fast forwarding, 40 years here, but when I opened my dojo, my dad grabbed the bamboo stick and I said, Dad, we can't do that anymore. You bring that thing out, they're going to lock us up.
Yeah, I don't know what would happen first. We'd lose all our students or I'd be in prison. I'm not sure.
But
Right.
That leads me into an interesting question, right? You're talking about 40 years ago, the mentality of coaching was very different than what it is today.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that translated over that period of time? And is there a difference in the way of teaching? Is there a difference way of coaching? Maybe it's not as hard. You mentioned that, but how do we compensate to still produce very effective judo players?
So it depends on what your objective is as a coach, right? If your goal is to make money, if your goal is to have a big academy, if your goal is to have lots of people doing the sport, you can't run your academy that way because people just can't take it, right? You can't train them that hard. You can't push them to the limit. You can't be that much of a disciplinarian. There has to be some flexibility. That's if you're trying to run a successful school with lots of students. If you're trying to produce champions, then you can approach your training that way. you have to be very hard on your champions. They have to have discipline. They have to have, hard training methods. They have to learn tough lessons. There's no quick way to the top. You've got to learn from your mistakes. You've got to train hard, and you got to grind. That's what I believe in anyway. So, and we at my academy, we did both. Like, because people challenged me when I first opened my school. People said, well, you can't do both. You can't have a judo dojo that has over 200 students and have recreational kids and have tons of people enjoying the sport, and under that same roof, produce Olympic champions and produce world medalists. And I said, why not? I said, because it's just not possible. It's two different cultures. Well, I ran two different cultures at my school, and I accomplished it. We just started the younger kids and the recreational kids much, much earlier. And we segmented all of our classes to different levels, no different than they do in other martial arts. But then we had a tough competition team or a training team that, that was segmented, and nobody else was allowed in that class. My father and I ran that class, and, we drilled hard, we trained hard. And when they left the door, the culture changed back, to more recreational again. But my dad didn't lead any of those classes. For the recreational students, I knew well enough that you need an instructor who caters to their needs, better than he can.
Yeah.
How do you recognize?
Go ahead, Thomas. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, how do you recognize the students who really want to go to the next level versus the ones who want to do, as a hobby, pure recreation? I mean, at that young age, are there triggers that you're looking for as a coach to, this is, Bobby Joe, maybe there is an opportunity, or you don't see it yet at that age?
I think you recognize it early. You recognize kids that have, natural athletic ability or some sort of aggressive behavior where they're tougher than most. They get knocked down, they get right back up. They pick things up quick. They're willing to engage. They're not shy. You can notice a kid who's geared towards, tough training and competition right away. There's some kids that blossom that don't start out that way, but that get their confidence over time. You might not recognize that kid as early, but if you have a good path and they're learning good fundamental judo and good basics, then and they stick with the sport, 4 or 5 years, they're going to end up being a good judo player or a good athlete because of the technique that they're learning. So there's two different paths. One's more of a fast track. You grab a kid who wrestles, who's used to getting knocked around and getting thrown down hard and getting back up and no nonsense. And you put him on a judo mat, he's obviously right away going to stand out, amongst your other kids who are coming because they're timid or they're getting picked on in school or what have you. It's a place for both, but you can recognize the ones that are meant for competition, and you got to feed them that path. Otherwise you're going to lose them too, because they don't want to go slow.
Yeah. Understimulated, right? Essentially.
Correct. It's just boring to me. I'm not challenged, etc.
Yeah.
Right. Do you think that the late bloomers lose that opportunity because they were not recognized early enough, or that opportunity just pushes back later?
No, I think if they stick with the sport, there's junior judo and then there's senior judo. And what I mean by that is that, it's a physical sport. So a kid can win at a young age if he matures quicker than everybody else, or if he's physically stronger than everybody else at a young age, he has an advantage, right? Technique can only go so far. When you're undersized or you're a mismatch strength-wise as a child, and one's aggressive and one's timid, typically the aggressive kid is going to win. You know what I mean? It's just the way it is. But when we get older, everybody gets mature, everybody's been doing the sport long enough, you have that strength now, you have that man strength. Now it's where technique wins. And there is two different styles of judo that happen. And that's why in the sport of judo, we typically lose a lot of kids that win at a young age. We typically lose them when they become adults because they're not used to losing. And all of a sudden they're being put in the big pond with the big people. And they go, wow, I'm not winning on my toughness anymore. It's really technique that I need. And maybe they're not willing to put in the time, or they have so many bad habits, they can't break those bad habits and they get frustrated and they quit.
So hold on. So what you were saying is that the kids who are not as successful in the beginning, they actually have more chance or more opportunity to continuing on, not necessarily in a success rate, but just continue on training?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes, yes. But don't forget, I did judo when I was a little boy. I won all the time when I was a little kid. I ended up sticking with the sport and being good as an adult as well. So there is a path where because it's all about technique. So if you're learning the right technique from a young age, and it's not the focus isn't always just on winning. It's about using good technique when you play the sport, then you'll develop into a good senior athlete. But a lot of young kids put a lot of emphasis on just winning first, and it's about winning medals and being the champion. Yeah. And then those kids don't ever develop their technique properly because winning came easy.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah, Gary, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, well, talking about coaching kids, how do you push the timid kid? Because I'm going through this with my daughter, and I think I'm pushing her properly, but I want to make sure that I don't discourage her, that I'm not too over the top with it. And basically all I'm doing is if she's giving it her all, not quitting, right now, that's good enough for me. But I want her to keep striving. I want her to build the technique on top of that, but I also want to make sure I'm going about it the right way.
Again, I think it comes down to what the objective is with your child. I mean, sometimes, if her goal and your goal is for her to become a champion, then they have to be pushed a little harder and, pushed to the limit. If the goal is to help them become more confident and help them achieve anything in life and learn the lessons we all want them to learn and have them be good people, then I think you don't push so hard. You allow them to sort of, I wouldn't give them always the option. I would always push them to that next point where, hey, let's try Randori. Let's try a competition. Like, let's not be afraid, to do something. Let's give it a try. And there's no harm in, whether we win, whether we lose, let's use it as a test and to prove that we can do something. Whether we succeed or not, the thing is to try.
To take the test.
Yeah. My daughter is, my daughter's not aggressive at all. She's a girly girl, right? She's somewhat becoming an athlete now, but yeah, she doesn't really like judo. But I want her to do judo because I know it's good for her. And I want her to get out on the mat. I want her to train. I want her to learn those lessons. I want her to learn the hard work. And she has massive anxiety when it comes to tournaments. Understandably so. She's going on the mat as my child that everybody expects the world from. And she's just a beginner judo player, right? She's 12 and she does it recreationally. She's not training hard. But so for her, she goes out there with massive anxiety. And I say, Taylor, why are you crying? Like, just go try. This is just another girl, right? She's just another little kid who's just as nervous as you are. And I don't care whether they win or not. I want to see you, conquer your fears and do some things and get out of your comfort zone and know that it's okay just to try.
Great. Thanks for the advice. I appreciate it.
Let's go back a little bit in time when you were to your beginnings. At which point do you think that judo became what you really wanted to do? So, and I'm leading this into the statement that you made, you never had a choice. It was a family affair. You were always at the dojo. Your father, obviously, clearly a well-accomplished coach and so on. At which point you start loving this? At which point this becomes, I really want to do this. I want to do this for a living. And then obviously this leads into all kinds of success for you.
Not until I was about 15 years old. I won every national championships when I was a kid from age 6 to 11. I took second when I was 11 years old. And then I won every national championship except for when I was 14 years old. That was the only time I didn't place in the nationals. And then from 15 on, then I was sort of a young phenom. But, that's winning every single local competition. I went undefeated till I was 11. So I had a really successful youth, and we went to every tournament. My dad took us to car rides across the country, and we drove everywhere to fight against everybody. So I had a very active career. But it really wasn't until I was about 15 years old and I had matured physically myself that I actually started to enjoy the sport. And it's also because we started to travel. I got to do things that most other kids don't get to do, right? Started to get to go to training camps in Oklahoma or California. I started to get to go, be exposed to another world of judo and some friends, some other teenage boys that we got to stay at the Olympic Training Center together and train together over the summer. I got to do some cool things, and that's when I started to really like the sport. I was already good at it, but now I started to like it for me, and I was developing physically as well. So I was like, seeing muscles, and seeing my body start to mature. And I actually got to compete against some of the best U.S. players at the time who had medaled in the Olympics. And at 15, I had given them a good run for their money. It was good matches. I ended up losing the contest, but it kind of opened my eyes to like, wow, maybe I can go to the Olympics because I'm already close to the best.
Are you?
And
Is
that's
that your
when I really
is that
liked
your
it.
train of thought at that point? Olympics as a goal?
That seed was planted in me when I was 6 years old. I remember watching the 1976 Olympics with my father on our, on the floor, on a beanbag floor when I was 6, watching the Montreal Olympics. And I remember like the glow in my dad's eye and him saying to me that, one of the best things that you can do, for your country is to represent them in the Olympic Games. And that's when the just kind of birth of that Olympic spirit or Olympic flame was born inside of me, where he said, someday I want you to see if you can't go to the Olympics. And that was my goal.
Did that thought stick around for you to the very end until you actually did that?
It did, and it still burns inside me now. I mean, listen, if I could go back and fight again, I would do it now. Like,
no pressure, right?
Yeah, like, I love it. That's why I coached 2 Olympics. I went to 4 Olympics. I watch every single moment of every competition I can online. I'd rather be there, but I follow it, to a T.
So that's one of the things that you and we spoke prior to this official conversation is, the preparation to the world-class level, the top level performance, whether it's world championships or Olympics, whatever the format is. Often viewers and spectators, they see that few minutes as is unfolding, right? But they often don't even know what it takes to get to that level as far as preparation. And it's not even weeks, it's not even months. It's, well, you tell me, how long does it take? Well,
a lifetime.
And you've had the opportunity not only be in those shoes, but also coach others to approach or achieve that level of performance. What does it take to get to that level?
Well, say the Olympics is not every 4 years, it's every day, right? So what everybody sees is, the Summer Olympics is coming. Great, let's tune in for 16 days of Olympic glory and watch the athletes. But what they don't realize is that the daily grind that every athlete has to go through. And, it's not just judo. Judo training is one aspect of it. And a lot of times, it's twice a day judo training. So it's morning technique and it's afternoon randori or, sparring at night. So you're talking about a minimum of like 2.5 hours of judo every day, an hour in the morning and an hour and a half in the evening. But sandwiched in between there is their strength and conditioning on some days. Some days it's their track workouts. Some days it's their morning. If they've got weight issues, it's their morning run. And it's, some afternoon conditioning. So it's typically 3 practices or 4 practices every single day. And for our athletes, the training was really hard and it was a grind. And we use the best resources we can for, strength and conditioning and to put these guys in peak condition. But when we traveled to competitions, that's really where it was almost more like a vacation because they got a day on a plane where they didn't have to train. But when we get there, they're right off the plane, they get their sweats, they get their uniforms, and we go to the training hall and we get to go to our session in. But it's not training 3 or 4 times a day, it's training once a day, which feels like a break. So a lot of times they liked being on the road because it wasn't as grueling as it was when it's at home.
Yeah, and that's everyday preparation. I mean, it peaks closer to, the big games, right? The big
Correct.
tournaments, right? They amp it up.
Correct. Yeah, and sometimes when we're overseas, don't get me wrong, when we're at international training camps, you've got 500 of the best judo players on the mat, in the same hall, the Russians, the Japanese, the French, the Germans, the whole world is training together at a training camp. Those are just all out brawls. I mean, you're doing 10 sparring rounds, 5 minutes a round with some of the best guys in the world, and everybody's trying to get the better of each other because you're trying to prove, who's better in training. Because the competition is, 6 months down the road, and you're going to remember that I'm better than you, and that's where we get to prove ourselves. And these guys bang heads, a couple hours in the morning, couple hours in the evening. They're sleeping in between, and they're hydrating and getting food. But they're training twice a day, when we're on the road at training camps as well. Plus, we'll make them still do their either a track workout or a strength and conditioning in between that. So they're always training at least twice, if not 3 or 4 times a day. In preparation of the Olympics.
I can't help myself to think that there is many opportunities to quit during this entire grind. I mean, and it's probably more than few. And sitting in the coach seat, it's probably huge responsibility to, one, make sure they stay on track, focused mentally, but also to make sure that they, perform on the physical level where they need to perform. What in the world do you do, Jimmy, to make sure these athletes over these months of preparation, especially leading up to these, world-class performances? Oh, we lost Gary for a second. What do you do during these times? What do you do, to keep them motivated?
I mean, first of all, from the get-go, it's about getting buy-in from the athlete about your program, your training program, your belief, your vision, your methodology. So kids that come to me, when they come to me, we start out with a goals meeting. Goals and expectations. Tell me what your goal is in the sport. I don't care whether their goal is to be Olympic champion or if it's just to be, a national champion, or I want to get my black belt. Anybody can come train at my academy, but every one of them has a different mindset and a different set of goals. So we always start with, what is your personal goal? Where do you want to go? And then we put together what the expectations are. And then we put together a roadmap of how we're going to reach that goal, right? So whether it's the training program we're going to be on, the strength and conditioning we need to do, the development program we're going to put in place to help you reach your potential so that those goals can become a reality. We map all that out on paper together, me and the athlete. And we sit down and we come to agreement. You buying into this? Okay, great, because I'm going to hold you accountable for what you just agreed to. And my goal is to keep you on course. And a lot of times, these athletes, it's not always about stepping up on top of the podium and reaching their goals initially, right? There's way more failures than there are successes. Mm-hmm. It's just unfortunate that, in the world of social media and most importantly on television, we only show champions. We show the Super Bowl game. We don't have a consolation game for the losers, right? We show the superstars. We always show people, reaching the pinnacle, wearing the medal. Look at me, how good I did.
No participation ribbon.
Right. But what about the guy that did train four times a day, for 4 years straight, and who went to every competition and who made all the personal sacrifices of being away from his family or his wife, his kids, and ultimately lost first round, and didn't have success, or at all of the tournaments along the way to reach, the pinnacle, lost all of those events. Like, those are hard moments because these athletes are breaking down, crying, saying, Coach, I'm giving you everything I've got. I've done everything you've asked me to do. I'm not succeeding. I can't make it. And, your goal, your job as a coach is to keep them on track and to actually pull them back.
Let me stop you right there. So what do you do then? I've done everything that I possibly can do. I'm doing everything that you asked me to do. Right. And we're still not getting there.
But, first we look in the mirror and we say, are you truly doing everything? Right?
There it is.
Did you miss this practice? Did you not go to that tournament I asked you to go to? When you said you didn't feel like going. I told you had to go. You told me you couldn't, right? Did you make weight at every event that I asked you to? No, you decided to fight up a weight. You didn't want to make the sacrifice. So you're still only partially in. You're telling me you did one thing, but I'm showing you did another. But there are those athletes that actually do buy in and do everything. And along the way, you say, hey, that's okay, because this isn't our goal. You didn't win today, but I thought your goal was to win in the World Championships, or your goal was to win in the Olympics, or your goal was to make the Olympic team. This is just a local tournament. We're developing here. You're training really hard, right? We're not peaking you for this local tournament. This is just practice. You have to understand that this tournament is just practice. This isn't an indication of what you're going to do at the end. And I'll give you one example of that. Kayla Harrison, she was our first Olympic champion, right? Mm-hmm. Well, she came to my dojo and back when she was 15 years old, and I forget what year that was. It's, it was a while ago, but I remember when she was about, I think 18, 19 years old, 19, I think she was. And I took her and we went to a tournament locally. It was the Starrett Cup. It was in Brooklyn, New York. She said, you want me to fight in the Starrett Cup? Why? I said, because you need matches. You need fights. You train with all guys, but you need to, train. You need to fight against women. We're going to go there and hopefully some girls show up. I don't care how good they are, but you're going to get some matches in because we need lots of matches against girls so that you can get ready for the World Championships. And her goal that year was to win the World Championships. And that was October in Tokyo. So this is January of 2010. And we went to this local competition And there happened to be 2 girls that showed up at the tournament, 2 Canadian women. And they were like top 15 ranked women in the world at the time. So they were going to be good matches for Kayla. And she was a silver medalist at the Junior World Championship. So she was doing fairly well for herself. But this was the next jump to the senior level. So we went to this tournament, and there were 3 girls in the division, Kayla and 2 others. So she had 2 fights, and she lost both of her matches. She went 0-2. And this was a local, small judo tournament. But it wasn't about winning that event. It was about getting the matches so you can learn from your mistakes, make improvements, make adjustments, and get the experience that you need so that when the time comes for you to compete and win at the biggest level, you'll have those pennies in the bank to draw from.
So let me end on that conversation right after these matches,
Sure.
or right after that event. What is the conversation between you and her? I mean, obviously local event, not so prestigious. Yes, maybe not. But listen, the reality of the situation is that there's 2 lost matches, and we are supposed to be training for the World Championship, which is only a few months away. I mean, let's not fool ourselves here. There is a psychological impact to all of this. So what do you tell her? And I guess what's her feedback on all this?
Well, I mean, at the time, the athlete feels like they can't make it. They're never going to be good. I'm a failure.
Right.
And I'm not going to make it. And then that's when you say, well, what did we learn from this? Right? What are the things we need to improve on to get better? Today's not our goal. Today was just a test. But what we realized by taking the test is you've got a lot of things to work on. There's a lot of still room for improvement. And those girls are tough girls. They were, Amy Cotton and Catherine Roberge from Canada. Both of them were good players. Like I said, some of them were, fighting for medals at world level competitions. Some of them medaled in, they went to the Olympic Games for their country. They were good players. So, but it made us realize that there was so much more work for Kayla to do, and especially fighting against left-handed players, which was a weakness for her. And, these girls were lefties. So it proved that she needed more work against left-sided judo players. And we had to develop strategies and a game plan for dealing with them. And we did. And then we went to Europe, and she continued to improve upon her skills. We sent her to Japan for a week and with my dad, and she trained, 25 rounds a day of randori training. And slowly but surely besides, she was only 19. So physically she's getting stronger each day that goes by. These other girls are getting older. And lo and behold, when it came time, October, she was at peak level performance. She had proved a lot of her mistakes. She was hungry. And because she had lost in January and knew that there was so much to work on, and because she wanted to be a winner, she was all ears. She was a sponge. She said, teach me, show me. I don't ever want that feeling again. And 10 months later, she ended up becoming World Judo Champion, only the 2nd woman in history to ever do that from the United States. And that was 10 months apart. She went from the lowest of low to the highest of highs. And that tournament was in Tokyo, Japan, 2020. So the birthplace of judo, and It was an amazing place to win the title.
Right. So what was your feeling at that point? I mean, looking at the 10 months of hard work that you were witnessing right in front of your eyes.
Awesome. Amazing. Like, listen, when you can take an athlete, when you take an athlete to the top of the world podium from the United States, when every other country is so professional in their approach to judo, every other country has paid coaching staff. They have support staff. They have large judo budgets to take not just their 1 or 2 athletes, but 28 athletes on the road with them, 5 coaches, trainers, medical staff, physios, you name it. They've got a whole staff of people. I'm going with my dad and 5 athletes, my dad and a group of people to try to compete with the best on a shoestring budget, So what we were able to accomplish was nothing short of incredible. And I attribute it to, the system that my dad put in place for me, my technique and my world experience and what I learned over the years and how to adapt. And then also the will of the athletes and the commitment that I got from all of the champions that we ended up helping become the best.
Yeah. And I recently actually watched the press conference from that event, with her, and her appreciation for all the work that you've put into this whole thing was quite. I mean, there were, tears and emotional in the whole thing. It's, what is your take on all of this as far as from a coaching perspective? Because it has to be an irreplaceable feeling to have that impact personally on an athlete or a student or just a person, right? Because you guys developing a relationship essentially, right? This is a 10th month, more than 10 months. I mean, 10 months is the final stretch, but this goes on for years at this point, right?
Started in 2005 with Kayla, and it ended
go.
in 2016. But today we become family.
Right.
The athletes become part of our family, right? They come to our house for dinners. They come to our house for parties. They babysit our kids. We take care of them when they're on the road. They give back and they become family friends with my wife and all my kids, and they become like brothers and sisters. So for me, they're like my children. For my other kids, they're like sisters and brothers. So that's Travis and Kayla and the rest of them. So they truly do become a part of your family, and your family makes grave sacrifices to help. They're giving up their father or giving up their husband to go on the road to help other people reach their goals and dreams. So they realize the sacrifices that are made 360 degrees around them. And I expect that in return from our athletes as well. I expect them to give back and show thanks and be respectful, to everybody that helped them along the way, because we don't do this alone. Nobody can do it by themselves. We need that help and support, but to know that you had your fingerprint, on that, the end result, it's greater than doing it yourself. It's better than doing it yourself because you're doing it with somebody else, right? And you create this bond between you that just can never be broken. You just know that how much of yourself you gave, how much they gave of themselves, and that's why it's just this thing when we do it. It's electric.
I was about to ask you what's better in your eyes, being the athlete and going through the same motions, or actually witnessing as a coach, as somebody, as one of your students, one of your athletes is doing.
It's easier to do for yourself. It's much harder. It's easier, but it's more lonely. It's harder to do it.
Define this, because this is interesting. So you're saying that you going through that training camp is easier than actually you coaching somebody. Why?
It is. Because as an athlete, you're selfish. As an athlete, you only have to think about yourself. So if I want to do the work, I will do the work to be a champion. And I ultimately control my own destiny. When I go out on the mat, I fight for myself. I'm able to turn it on, turn it off. And I actually suffer the consequences of my own decisions. And I did it a lot of times. I mean, I had some coaches along the way that invested their time in me. My dad had a second wife and had a different life and couldn't travel with me. I think if I had the luxury of my father in my corner, like he was able to coach Kayla and Travis and Rhonda and everybody else, if he was my coach in my career, I would have been Olympic champion. I have no doubt. I would have won the Olympics. But he wasn't able to go on the road with me. He could only train me at home. So a lot of times I went on the road with just whoever was the coach of the month for the sport.
That's hard.
It was hard. I did a lot by myself. I had one stretch of time with Steve Cohen from 1996 till 2000, that Olympic stretch. I had one coach who came with me everywhere, did everything, went all the training camps and helped me. And that was my most successful time in the sport. I won the Worlds in 1999. I had a record of I only had lost 4 times in those 4 years. I had 90 wins and 4 losses. I won every major tournament there was to win. The only thing I didn't win was the Olympics in 2000. But I had a coach who dedicated himself 100% to me and went everywhere with me. And that was my most successful time in the sport. So if I had had my dad with me from the beginning, from 92 to, the end of my career, I no doubt would have won. I have no doubt I would have won it. But I didn't have that luxury. So when you have to do it alone without a coach, it's very difficult because you don't push. Even though I pushed myself as hard as possible, I might not have trained as smart as possible. Mm-hmm. I might not have made enough adjustments. Not enough people were looking at me, picking apart my game and helping me. Because back then, you couldn't watch the videos online. It's not like someone could watch you and immediately give you feedback. Nothing, the internet didn't exist, so it was really hard. You couldn't see the competitions unless you flew somebody over there to specifically film you and bring it back with you. So, it was a hard time to do it remotely. You had to be there to have an impact. So, but doing it for somebody else when you're a coach, you can push that athlete and you can tell them to correct themselves. You can tell them to fight a certain way, but ultimately you're a puppet master, but you don't always, when you pull the string, it doesn't always react the way it's supposed to. You know, you don't control your own destiny anymore when you're a coach. You have to count on an athlete to deliver on what you told them to do and stick to a game plan and do it the right way. And you have to constantly be on them. And judo actually made it more difficult as the years went on, because they told coaches that they could no longer coach during the competition.
Right.
Man, all of the adjustments that we made in 2012, you know, if I couldn't yell during the match in 2012, Kayla probably doesn't win the Olympics. You know, but I was able to, you know, while she's fighting, tell her to do things, tell her to make certain adjustments, move her hands, what type of attack to make, etc. So you're actually like, you know, directing the job out on the mat. And ultimately those adjustments led to good decisions. It ultimately led to the wins, you know? So I think by doing it with somebody else, it's harder, but there's a greater appreciation and the end result feels better because you did it with somebody else who couldn't have done it by themselves.
Somebody told me a while back that being a coach or being an instructor is more of a being psychologist, being more of a therapist, being more a motivator. You know, you deliver food, you do all these things, you get a towel, you get water, all the other things. And the thought here was, you can't teach these people how to do judo. They know how to do judo. What you have to do is maneuver all these things around them essentially to set the path for them to be successful. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
You need both. You need both. Yes, 100%. You know, one of the main jobs. So the difference is this: if I was a coach of a program in Russia, or a coach of a program in Japan, or a well-established country that has a system of judo where the people that rise to the top are the very best, and we know their technique is flawless. Otherwise, they couldn't have gotten there. In that instance, you're right. You're more of a psychologist. You're more of, you know, making them feel mentally and physically ready to win the game. But because in America, our athletes, we don't have that level of talent. We don't have that skill. We don't have that technique. We actually have to drill our athletes and teach our athletes a system of how to win. You know, and I do believe it's a system of how to win, where we put our hands, how we grip, we drill transitions, and it's that drilling over and over and over again, so it becomes instinct that they know where to go and how to perform. That is part of the system of these athletes becoming excellent. And then on top of that, yes, you are a psychologist. You are somebody who helps them prepare mentally for the game. You're somebody who ingrains in them the power of visualization, the power of positive self-talk, the positive, you know, having a positive can-do attitude. I'm a winner. I'm a champion. I will prevail. Olympic champion, Kayla Harrison. You know, nobody's stopping me today. It's putting these messages in their heads that we are going to do it. Nobody's stopping us. The Olympic title is at your grasp. We're going to go take it. I need you to be a warrior today. I need you to fight. Let's go do it together. Like, it's getting them amped up the day of competition, and it's getting them ready to succeed. And that's a big part, man. That mental preparation, no doubt, is huge.
Do you think so? Why do you think it's so much easier for the other countries to be in that position versus here? What's the difference?
Number one, when you have, let's just say you have 500,000 judo players. If you have 500,000 judo players fighting for 7 slots, the people that make those 7 slots, they're going to be really good, because it's a law of attrition, right?
Not only that, but the competition between them is much higher, so the performance goes up, right?
Which means that the one who wins has to be good. He can't get there by accident. He had to beat too many good people to get there, right? So the people that make the national team, we know they're good in every area. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made it there. So now those coaches just need to take them along on the road. They need to, you know, refine them. They need to hold them back and make sure they don't get injured, and take care of them physically, mentally, and, you know, push them, but not necessarily have to teach them so much judo. Mm-hmm. By that point, they're already taught their judo. In this country, the people that make it to the top, not always, their basics aren't that good. You can be national champion in this country and not have good basic judo.
Why?
Which means that
how is that possible?
But when you show up at a competition and there's only 9 people in your division at the national championships, how hard is it to win nationals out of 9 people?
Well, let me ask you a tough question. So why there was only 9 people? Why the sport is not as popular as it used to be?
Well, for one thing, there's not enough instructors in this country anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Judo was done as a hobby for far too long. And therefore, you can't make a living from teaching the sport, or there aren't that many coaches making a living teaching the sport. They don't do it as their full-time job. They do it recreationally and part-time. That's number one.
Yeah.
So there's not enough instructors. So even if you wanted to do judo, you might live an hour away or an hour and a half away from the nearest judo dojo. And that dojo might not even be that good or have anybody for you to train with. So you're not going to keep going there. So there's not enough dojos that are accessible to get good. That's number one. Number two, there's not enough high enough level coaches in this country to teach you good judo and teach you good basics. Back years ago, there were a lot of Japanese instructors who ran dojos, who taught good judo, who had big clubs, but a lot of them, unfortunately, are dying off or they're too old to have an impact anymore. And the next generation really hasn't taken over because you can't make a living from it, right? And because it's, financially, it's hard to do. Then you take all of those obstacles and you add to the fact that even when you make it to the top of the sport and you become the best in this country, you might not get anything paid for because you're not at a world-class level. You're just the best in this nation. So now you got to come out of pocket for all of your own training and all of your own trips until you reach a high enough level.
I mean, that has to be tough. I mean,
it is.
Even for the handful that really make it to that level and they have the passion to make it to that level.
Which is why there's only 9 people at the nationals, because who cares if I win nationals? I don't get anything. Right. It doesn't mean anything.
So how do we change it? I mean, because the way you're talking about this.
How long is this podcast?
Well, but I'm asking this because the way you're talking about this, in a decade or 2 or 3, will there be any judo in the U.S.?
It might be extinct.
I mean, those are tough words that you're saying right now.
It's the truth.
How do we change it? What in your vision we would have to do to bring judo back to what it used to be?
It takes somebody with vision. It takes somebody with really strong leadership who makes some bold statements and makes some tough decisions in terms of how this sport is going to be run in our country and what we're going to do to change the course and change the direction. Number one, you need to start with professional clubs. You need to start to teach instructors how to run dojos so that they can make money and do it professionally. No different than what jiu-jitsu has done, right? You can't go to any town in this entire nation now and not find a jiu-jitsu school. I mean, it's on every street corner now in every town. So it's accessible. Well, if it's accessible, a lot of people are going to do it. If a lot of people are doing it, then you've got a lot of money from memberships that allow you to have a budget to have teams and to fund people and run tournaments, et cetera. But without numbers, we can't do anything. So I believe it's not starting it in schools and in YMCA programs and things where it's free. Because what happens when you run it in poor places is that the people that are doing the sport, they're poor. They don't have money. They can't afford to go to competitions. They can't afford to buy judo gis. They can't afford to travel to get better. They can't attend camps. So you're always going up against this, you're always running against the grain. You've got to start to professionalize the sport and the dojos and teach people how to make a living from it so that the kid who's 19, 20, or 22 right now, who's about to graduate college or who's not even going to go to college says, you know what, instead of going to a trade or instead of, becoming a firefighter or police officer, I want to become a judo instructor. I'm going to go run my own academy. I can make good money running an academy. Even if it's 50 grand, 60 grand a year, they will do it full time because I get to be a coach. I get to, share my passion, share what I know. I get to take kids to tournaments. I get to run training camps. I really enjoy this. And I think more people would do it if there was opportunity for them to do it.
Is there a chance?
This is the start. Yes.
Is it a start?
We're starting down that path. And I also think the quickest way to grow this sport the fastest is to do it with jiu-jitsu. There's a lot of jiu-jitsu dojos in this country who came from judo. They already know good judo, right? And they value judo. And they know that what potentially could differentiate them from the other school in the town or the other academy that's next door is if they were actually taught a good curriculum of takedowns and throws, that they could be certified in teaching takedowns and throws safely to their students, but effectively, so that their school could be different than somebody else's. And, they're all about lineage. So if they could learn that from the best that America has as well and become certified and use that certification to grow their own academy and to, put more students in their door, and to produce better students, I think that there's a good amount of them that would do that. And instantly you'd have a thriving sport quickly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And, obviously my background is from jiu-jitsu, being 20 years on the mats. I can't emphasize enough, or at least for my students, the importance of traditional judo. I look at it as kind of two different paths, learning the takedowns from a jiu-jitsu or wrestling or grappling perspective. That's one thing, but judo introduces the more traditional approach to from feet to ground, and often that is very underestimated in jiu-jitsu academies, unfortunately. And I think what you're mentioning right now is that slow growth of that introduction of these judo programs coming into jiu-jitsu academies. And I'm really hoping that some of these traditions will continue on. And somewhat deep inside, I hope you're wrong. I hope that judo will not disappear. I'm a big fan, and I haven't been doing nearly as long as you have, but I love it.
Well, if it was ever going to take off, it would have taken off in 2012 and 2016, because that was the one time where the spotlight was on judo at the Olympics. Right. Kayla was a very household recognizable name. She was on television commercials. They actually showed her live judo matches. She was one of the stars of the Olympic Committee. Marty Malloy was a bronze medalist in the Olympics. There was a lot of media attention on Kayla and Marty together, and then in the last Olympics, it was Travis Stevens and it was Kayla Harrison. And because jiu-jitsu is so big and because MMA grew so much, there's a lot of fans now of judo, because it's the only Olympic sport that jiu-jitsu guys can watch, or that MMA guys can watch, where they understand what's going on. Right. And it's a good sport. They look forward to watching it. So they're showing more of the combat sports as a result of the growth of martial arts in our country, which is good. It brings attention to the sport. But if it didn't take off after those two games, it's not going to, unless something drastically changes. When I believe it's opening up enough academies and financially helping those academies get started and to run it successful, so that, in every state we have, a good group of dojos that are thriving, teaching good judo, making money from it, and producing kids that they're then sending to regional training centers and regional camps, so that the sport can grow. And until we do something like that, we're really, we have to have funding for these people to get better as well, through seminars and through camps and clinics and things like that. And we just don't do enough of that in the States.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. So what do you do these days besides running your businesses and being involved in the business perspective at Fuji and all the other things? Do you still coach? Are you still involved on the mats? Do you still teach?
So I did until COVID, right? I did until my dojo had to shut down. I'm based in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts is one of those states that's super strict with the COVID regulations. We weren't allowed to reopen until June. Late June is when we were able to reopen our academy. And even then it's only with social distancing, so I have a lot of students now that are still taking Zoom classes. I just did a survey this week. 35% of my students don't even want to ever come back to the dojo until it's back, till a vaccine is in place. And I had over 225 students at my academy just doing judo, and 35% of them will not come back. They only want Zoom classes. The other percentage, about 40% of them have come back, but it's with social distancing. So I've invested in a lot of dummies. I invested in, uchikomi training bands and things like that. And we're doing social distance judo. And then I have a small group of 20 athletes that, are black belt level national championship kids that they've been training throughout this whole thing, because they're considered a professional team. They're getting ready for the next Olympic Games. So we selected, 15 to 20 kids that stick together and train together and, and work out in preparation for Tokyo 2021.
Are you saying that we're going to see you at the Olympics?
You won't see me at this Games, no.
No, how come?
This Games is out. I haven't been the coach of United States Judo since 2016. So I stepped down after 2016. I haven't been traveling with the teams. I've passed that torch on to somebody else. And
What led you into that decision?
Lack of professionalism in the country of America. You know, if I told them that it's a full-time job. You can't expect somebody to travel the world and to be away from their family from 4 to 6 months every single year without compensation. And, you know, unfortunately the budget doesn't exist in USA Judo to pay its coaching staff. So I did it as more of a volunteer. You know, you get $500 a week that you're away from home. Well, that doesn't even cover the food that you buy when you're overseas on the road, or your phone bill or anything else. So it costs you money to travel as a coach of American Judo. So, you know, I did it for the last 8 years because I had kids who had given me a commitment since they were teenagers. They were like family to me, and they stuck with the sport. And then I felt I owed it to them to see it through to help them reach their goals, because they had committed to me as their coach. The next generation, or the group that they were asking me to coach in 2020, they're not from my dojo. They didn't commit to me. And I wanted to put all of them on a program that I believed in. And if they don't follow the program and they can't pay you, then why do you want to do a job where you can't ultimately make that much of an impact on the outcome of those athletes?
Yeah, it's very difficult to be in these positions. One, when you have so much passion for the sport and for these athletes, and you want to push them to the limit, but you have all these obstacles ahead of you, and maneuvering between them, especially when it comes to the world travels and having all these additional expenses. You know, I'm really hoping that some of that will clear out. You're doing amazing things in your academy or in your dojo, and I'm really hoping that you guys are going to resume back to normal. Do you think this is going to come back anytime soon, or are we looking at like 5 years of post-COVID?
No, I think it's going to come back. I think 2021 we're going to start to see an uptick. We're already starting to see an uptick of people coming back to academies. I mean, three of the businesses that I run, my Judo Academy, Fuji Sports, and Fuji Mats, we deal directly with academies, right? One, I have a dojo, and two, I deal with dojos all day long. So we're starting. New York just opened up October 1st, New York City anyway. And, you know, we're starting to see dojos order more gis, order more gear, obviously renovate and buy mats for their facilities. So the energy's there, and they are starting to come back already. Some schools are signing up 30 students a month, you know, 30 new students. So, you know, the growth is there. I think people want to get back to normal. Obviously, it's difficult to do right now with how fast this virus does spread. But I think that come January, come February, once some vaccines, we already have some treatment plans in place for this country. They know how to deal with the sickness better. There's some stuff you can take now to help mitigate the symptoms. So I think we've all learned from it. And I think that probably by summer of 2021 is when we'll be back to normal, where everything will somewhat come back to normal.
Yeah, I agree. I think we are looking at the same thing here in Midwest. I think by spring, summer of next year, I think we're going to be back to swing. And matter of fact, I do believe that by then everybody will be, you know, pushing hard to get back to the old norm, meaning they want to get out of the house, they want to do things. And I think some of the whether judo or jiu-jitsu sports, you know, all the outdoor activities are going to be very, very, very popular. So sure. I do believe that we'll be back on that. Jimmy, before we wrap this up, where can people find you? Where are you accessible? If anybody wants to learn more about you, where are you at?
On my Instagram, it's Jimmy Pedro USA. That's my Instagram account. My email, I respond to email 24/7. It's jimmypedro@fujisports.com. And my companies are fujisports.com and fujimats.com.
Beautiful. Thank you for the amazing story. Thank you for sharing all the experiences and thoughts on all the topics we talked about today. I loved having this conversation. We lost Gary halfway into this whole thing. I don't know what happened to him, but I guess we'll find out in a moment. But in any event, thanks for hanging out with me, and thanks for doing this for us.
Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. I wish you guys the best of luck.
Thanks, Jimmy. Take care.
Cheers. Take care.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.